excited to bring it to you. So this is me, just so you have an idea of who's behind the slides. So I am a licensed professional counselor. I am also a mental health advocate. I would call myself an aspiring yogi because I keep showing up. I won't say whether or not I keep improving, but I do keep showing up. And I'm also a wine enthusiast. So that's just something that I love, to go out and socialize and be out in the world and experience people and hear their stories. My pronouns are she and her. So that's me on the right. And then on the left, you see me and my favorite person in the entire world. That is my partner, Michelle. And that was taken at the Marine Corps birthday ball this past November. So it's always so much fun. And I'm very, very lucky to have her in my life. So um, bonus points for that later on. Okay, so let's talk about stress. So here's the deal is that stress, we're going to encounter it. And sometimes we can make it worse for ourselves than it has to be, by the way that we focus on situations or we see situations, the way we respond to situations. And the truth is that you want to deal with stress and you want to acknowledge that stress exists, while it's still manageable. And what a lot of us do is that we don't do that. We say, no, 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 I'm fine. I'm fine. I got it. I'm fine. And then that stress has time to build and it can turn into fatigue, and then it can turn into burnout, and then it can turn into I quit, and then it can turn into I've completely lost it. And so I think for the most part, a lot of us will experience the first two, that stress and fatigue. You may experience burnout at work. Sometimes we talk about that. So especially if you're in a helping or healing profession. I know that there's plenty of people, I currently work with the Marine Corps right now, and I am not a Marine, don't get it twisted. But I do have the privilege of working with the Marine Corps on some of their mental health stuff. And, burnout is real within the military as well, and now when we're looking at um, the longest war and the conflicts and the repeated deployments and all of the stress that goes along with that, before you ever lump on the stressors that come with transitioning out of the military after service, with some of the social factors that come into play. So it's just a continuum that we have to be mindful of. Uh, there's good stress and there's negative stress, of course, and so some of us may be experiencing good stress, and guess what? That's still stress. So getting married might be a really great thing, and it's stressful. If anybody has ever had the experience to plan a wedding, be in a wedding, or in fact even attend a wedding, it can be stressful. Becoming a parent is a beautiful thing for a lot of people. Some of my friends have just had babies. Some of them have just adopted babies. And guess what? They are tired and they are stressed. And they wouldn't trade it for the world. That doesn't mean it's not stressful. Training for a marathon. I've had experience with this. For some reason, I decided I wanted to train for a half marathon. Um, that, was physical stress. And then, of course, the negative stress that we're all, I think, more familiar with. The divorce, unpaid bills, injuries, all those things, that toxic work environments, maybe dealing with family sometimes, all of those different things that might be a little bit more negative. When stress is going to be present in your life, and you may think that you're doing a really good job of, saying, I got it, I'm handling it. You may also start to experience some of these symptoms, or you may start to see it in other people. Some people have difficulty concentrating over time. Some people become more irritable or negative. People might be obsessed with details of certain cases, right? So if you think about, somebody who gets really invested in their work, that's a great thing. But if it becomes too much and there's too much personalization and there's too much identification with the outcome of a case, depending on your profession or the outcome of a project, that can add stress. And sometimes you'll see that somebody starts behaving and responding a little bit differently. We've all seen these things, right? So here's the problem is that when I'm talking to groups of people who have experience in the military, whether that's active service members or veterans, and sometimes even family members, there's this idea of while other groups of people may back away and avoid, I feel like people in the military have been primed to grab the bull by the horns and try to fix it. And so when I think about this, I often use this cartoon in a lot of my presentations because I just think that this is like, I have all this stress. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to get better. I'm going to tackle it. I'm going to become, bigger, better, faster, stronger, all of those things. And so, I understand that and I appreciate that. And is there a way to make sure that we're working smarter and not just harder, because we could end up just kind of exhausting ourselves if our efforts aren't put in the right direction. Here's a couple more symptoms because people love to ask me about symptoms. And so, stress can affect your cognitive function, your behavioral function, emotions, right? Spiritual. I always think this is really interesting because sometimes people confuse spirituality with religiousness, and they're not synonyms. They could be, but they're not always. One of the most damaging things that I've seen happen as a result of stress and burnout is a loss of purpose, right? And that can lead to kind of feeling disengaged and then isolating. It can become really problematic. There's some other ones, decreases in confidence, decreases in the quality of your relationships that you might have at home or at work. Sometimes it's even physical. I think that Western medicine doesn't do as good a job as it could of recognizing the intimate and interconnectedness between the mind and the body as it relates to trauma and even just kind of life stressors. So we're getting better, but that's something that I'm very passionate about, kind of bridging that gap and bringing some mindfulness to that. So, okay, so we're going to talk about, not just stress, because everybody kind of knows what stress is, but we're going to talk about how it can be managed, because we can't really avoid it. You have to live in the world and you have to live your life. But we're going to start with managing it, and we're going to start with what's actually in our control. And then one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to start with what's between our ears. And, here's where you might start, right? Do I look like the bluebird of happiness? This is an accurate picture of me on Monday morning because I was experiencing some negative thinking, and we're going to kind of talk about that. It's a very human thing to do, and we're going to talk about how to move through this. Okay, so recognition, absolutely the antidote. We need that self-awareness. Self-awareness is, if we were going to get really textbooky, we could talk about where that falls on the hierarchy of needs and all that kind of psychology 101. I will spare you that unless you want me to talk about it, and then I can talk about it all day long. But recognizing there's a problem and recognizing that something's not working for you is always kind of going to be the first thing that we want folks to do when we're talking about something like this. Sometimes it's not going to be what's in front of us, but it's going to be how we're seeing the issue. So we're going to discuss some of the ways that our brain gets in the way. And then, of course, I want to leave you with some practical, immediately applicable tools that you can go forward from this time and use to kind of help you either reframe how you're seeing a situation, reframe those thoughts, or just kind of like clearing the drawing board. I'm thinking of an Etch-a-Sketch, if anybody's old enough to remember Etch-a-Sketch besides me, where you would draw this doodle and then you just shook it and it all went away. And you could reset and you had a clean slate. And there's a couple ways we can do that. So the first unhelpful thinking style, and I guess I should start off by saying I'm going to go and give you a brief overview of the most common ones. and talk a little bit about how they show up in your life, possibly, and give a couple examples of, tweaking those lenses. Um, and then at the end, I'm going to go through, and that's where I'll give these real, like, this is where we're going to really mind hack it. But you have to know what you're looking at first. And so that's how we're going to do this. So the first one is all or nothing thinking. And I think most of us have encountered this at some point. So really, you're only seeing two options. It's this is like, the one that you think about in New Year's when people start their fitness routines and they're all gung ho and they're, only eating salads and they're working out all the time and then they miss one day at the gym and the next thing you know, they're, head first into a pint of Ben and Jerry's and never set foot back in the gym again and it's all done. Why? Because if I couldn't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. So clearly this could be limiting and problematic because if you're thinking of things in that extreme, you're not really giving yourself a lot of room to grow or to flex. And so it can be very, very limiting. The other one that's really kind of intimately tied to this is that overgeneralizing. So if you're prone to see things in black and white, then on top of that, you might lean over into this overgeneralization in which everything sucks, nothing good ever happens. I'm either do it or don't do it at all. That kind of same idea of just saying if it's not one way that it needs to be, that I feel like it needs to be in this moment right now, then it's complete and utter garbage and nothing good can ever come from this ever again. And so you can see how some of these are going to be really closely related and linked, but sometimes people respond more to one than the other. And so I should stop and say here that once again, I'm going to reiterate this. There are no prizes or points being awarded at the end of this presentation for you to get all the way to the end and say, I don't do any of these. Because the truth is that you probably do. And the only thing that we're talking about, if somebody walks out and says, I don't do any of this stuff, is a lack of awareness, because this is a very human thing to experience and think about in the world. So just kind of remember that we're not diagnosing anything here. This is just some of the ways that people think, some really common ways that people think. Okay, the third one, this is one of my favorite ones to talk about, is this idea of a mental filter. Okay, and some people might also, if you have a legal background, you may have heard of this called negative attention bias. So what it is that you're really only paying attention to the evidence that is matching something that you're already holding to be true or matching a mood or a belief. So you'll notice the failure, but not any of the other times that you succeeded, right? Oh, I'm so stupid. I always fail at things. I don't even know why I bother trying. Never thinking about all the times that you tried something and you succeeded, right? The other side of this, and equally, I would argue, as problematic, although not quite as common, is when you notice only your successes and you never see any failures whatsoever. Now, I got to tell you, when people come into my office to see me, it's usually not the second one that they're struggling with, because, and that makes sense, right? So people who walk around telling themselves that they suck too much, to get kind of gritty with it, are more likely to come see me than the person who goes, I'm perfect, I don't have a problem. They're probably not going to come see me. So I'm not saying they're not out there, but I am saying that it's a little less common, at least from what I've encountered. So again, it's kind of like, are you only seeing things one way? Okay, so the next one, absolutely related to this, from the mental filter, is this idea of disqualifying the positive. And I really like to kind of explain this to folks in a very conversational way, which is crappy outcomes are seen as fate taking its proper course, and good outcomes are happy accidents that dumb luck allowed you to have, but don't you dare get used to it. Don't you dare do that, because this just happened to happen just this one time, but don't get used to it because you're probably going to suck again tomorrow, right? So there's this idea of like, think about if you partner that negative attention bias, right? If we go back and we say, okay, we're only going to pay attention to the things that we already agree with, and I'm already going to say that I'm agreeing with, this negative idea, I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm the has-been that never was. That's a true quote from somebody, right? I'm the has-been that never was. Okay. And then they end up being very successful with something and they go, well, that's a happy accident. I got a publishing deal, but that's only because that publisher is so stupid that they ended up taking my book. Like, really? Really? Is that the way is that helpful? What is that going to do? Is that feeding you in a way that is going to nourish you forward into something greater than where you're at right now? I mean, like, let's think about this. Our thoughts really are food for us to kind of propel ourselves forward, right? So, kind of thinking about that. And I think this bird uh, just completely captures the essence of when people disqualify the positive, right? So, um, I kind of love him or her. Okay. All right. Jumping to conclusions. This is one that I really want people to pay attention to because I think it's probably one that gets talked about the least. I think most people are kind of used to the all or nothing thinking conversation. Um, this one and the two flavors, the mind reading and the fortune telling, are really problematic because they can be so destructive, and oftentimes we don't even realize that we're doing them. I would say that this is one of the ones that has the least amount of recognition that people kind of are primed for, right? So check it out. Mind reading, you think that you already know what somebody's going to say. Oh, no, I'm not going to negotiate my salary because I already know they're going to tell me no, right? That can be problematic. Why? Because we know that salary negotiation is an important part of the job hiring process, right? And you can read on a whole bunch of websites and articles that have absolutely nothing to do with psychology that talk about the importance of negotiating. But if you're undercutting and you're selling yourself short, what is that doing for you? What is that doing for your employer and your communication of your value, your understanding of your value? That's just one example, right? Look at relationships. I'm not going to approach this person because I know they're going to reject me. As somebody who looks the way that I do, I was so thrilled and over the moon when Michelle actually came up to me because guess what? That doesn't happen very often because most people make assumptions about me based on my appearance, right? And I'm sure that some of you have experienced that as well. Now, I am not turning a blind eye to some of the safety issues and problems and concerns that absolutely come along with that. I'm just saying that sometimes we do this mind reading piece also in this context, but please don't think I'm ever advocating for people not to be safe and take care of themselves. The fortune telling piece is probably even more problematic than the mind reading piece. This is why. Let me paint this picture for you. Maybe you've experienced this. You wake up in the morning, your alarm clock goes off, it's Monday morning, and you think, oh God, I got to get up and go to work. And you start thinking in your head what your morning is going to consist of. You're thinking about the traffic that you're going to have to sit in on your way to the office. You're thinking about that coworker that has something snarky to say. You're thinking about your email inbox that's already full of emails that you can't possibly get to because somebody else is pulling you in for a surprise meeting that, should have been scheduled beforehand but wasn't. And then you think about the fact that, you woke up late and the dishes weren't done, so now your spouse or significant other might have something to say about that when you get home. Oh, and then maybe you have kids, maybe you don't, maybe the dog threw up, maybe something else. and you go through and you paint this entire picture of your day. By the way, you haven't actually gotten out of bed yet. You're just thinking about your day. I've had so many clients that I've worked with come in and talk about dealing with anxiety, especially social anxiety and anticipatory anxiety, when they think about exactly kind of the scenario that I've painted for you. And my response to them is often, well, my God, no wonder you don't want to get out of bed. That sounds awful. I wouldn't want to get out of bed for that either, right? And so here's the thing is that one, if that's actually true, if it's accurate that you have a miserable commute and a toxic work environment, well, then it might actually be time to look for a different position someplace, right? I have been in that space, and that is one of my mental red flags, that if I find myself fortune telling my day, and when I check in and I do my internal homework and I figure out, no, this isn't actually fortune telling, this is an accurate representation of my lived experience, I go, it might be time for a different job. And I start updating my resume. However, if I realize that I'm like completely painting this negative, and then I do get up and I do get out the door, and guess what? Traffic's not that bad. But because I don't have this awareness of my fortune telling, I don't notice that traffic actually wasn't that bad. I don't notice that I got into work, and actually my coworker bought me coffee. And, and my boss, I forgot that she had completely already taken the day off, so I don't have to deal with that today. Oh, thank God, right? And so you go and you do your work and you do your day, and it's not that bad and it's great and everybody is so wonderful. But how often do we come back and put that lived evidence and that lived experience against that mental argument that we had with ourselves when we first woke up? A lot of people will not. They won't go back and compare notes. They'll just do the one. And, negative thoughts and negative emotions are a lot more powerful to our brain, rooted in survival, right, than positive ones. And so, of course, those are going to be more powerful. So we kind of just want to be mindful of this fortune telling. Okay. The next two, emotional reasoning, and one that everybody always remembers because it's called masturbation, we're going to talk about, and they're a little bit more kind of common, and you'll see these maybe show up in other people. I think these are really recognizable in others as well as it for ourselves. So here we go. Assuming that we feel a certain way, we think it must be true. So what does that look like? That looks like, just because I feel embarrassed, I must be an idiot. Well, here's what's true. Feelings are important. Now, I am a feelings person, okay? And the irony is not lost on me that I spend most of my day surrounded by really, really logical left-brained people. And that's an interesting experience for me as I move throughout the world, because I am primarily an emotional driven person. So this is the most logical way that I have figured out how to explain why feelings are important, and where their limits are. So feelings are important because they are an accurate representation of where you're at any given moment. Feelings are authentic, but what people sometimes mistake them for are statements of objective truth or fact, and that's not true. Feelings can be authentic, and they can give you a moment in time to say where you're at, but they really are not good. They're flaky, they're subject to change, and they're not good at making statements of objective truth. And so I think it's really good to know when you feel embarrassed, or when you feel guilty, or when you feel sad, or when you feel happy, because that tells you where you're at. However, just because you feel sad does not mean you're a depressing person. It means that in that moment, you're feeling sad. Now, if you feel sad a lot of the time, more often than you feel any other emotion, that might mean that you are experiencing feelings of depression, and that might be something that you want to talk to somebody about. But let's not go and define your personhood and your identity based on a feeling, right? So just want to throw that out there. Masturbation, thank you, Carl Rogers, for coining that term. Um, it's it's just defined as the woulds, shoulds, and oughts that we kind of put on ourselves. I feel like parents are, all have their PhDs in doing this because they feel like they should be doing all the things all the time for all the people. So using critical words on ourselves, right? And so here's what happens. One is that you can apply it to other people. And when you apply it to other people, oh, this person should be doing this for me. And oh, this person ought to, do this for that person. Or they should have responded to a situation in this given way that I feel is best. It really sets you up for disappointment. And sometimes it can even lead to feelings of betrayal. And then when you apply it to yourself, oh my gosh, I must be the president of all the clubs and all the things, so I can show that I really care and I'm really invested. When you do that, it can often lead to exhaustion, and feelings of guilt, because guess what? Our humanness doesn't allow us to do all the things for all the people all the time. And so this is something that we really put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I mean, the rest of the world puts pressure on us, but I think that so many times we put so much additional pressure on ourselves. And you'll see that with people who, I have boatloads of people in my life that I'm pretty sure that they have some like time traveling superpower, because I see what they accomplish in a day and I'm like, I don't know how you're doing it. You're allegedly you have the same 24 hours as the rest of us. And I don't see how they do it. If that's their bliss and that gives them joy, well, more power to them. I'm not going to tell them not to be involved. But if you are feeling weighed down and it's not giving you joy, it's giving you stress, it's giving you pain, um, you know, why are you doing it, right? And you may decide to keep doing it, but at least to have an answer for yourself, at least know what it is that's driving you to do these things. Okay, these are the last two that I'm going to cover, and I'm going to cheat and I'm going to tell you what they are first. Okay, labeling and personalization. Labeling and personalization are not only problematic, just kind of in our culture across the board, but I feel like they're also particularly painful and problematic to our community, to the LGBT community, right? Because, well, we're going to unpack this, but it gets a little bit more complex. Actually, it gets more complex when you're talking about any marginalized community. And the reason for that is because of some of the social constructs that are in place that kind of reinforce some of these negative thinking styles. And as we go through this, I think what you'll see is that sometimes some of the negative attitudes that we have towards ourselves or towards even other members of our own community can be influenced by these negative thinking styles and reinforced by the culture that we're in. So when we talk about labeling, thinking about all the different labels that get put on us, take the LGBTQ piece out of it, right? I specifically chose one. So I used to do a lot of work in sexual assault and domestic violence, right? And so this was a picture that I used to use in my presentations there. And thinking about, here's somebody, and she, I think I'm going to say, appears to be, labeled slut, stupid, nerd, ugly, gross. There's white trash on there. Can't see all of them, but all of these negative things. And so I think if you've, survived 7th and 8th grade, were particularly rough years for me. People try to put lots of different labels on you, and sometimes we absorb them. And sometimes we don't even realize that we absorb them. I have a story that I tell about So a little bit about my background is that I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up about 25 minutes outside of New York City on the Jersey side. And I come from a large Italian family, and so I have 16 cousins. And of those 16 cousins, the boys, approximately, I think like about 8 of them or 9 of them, were all sports like rock stars, right? Okay. And then I had my female cousins, and all the girls, except me, were all cheerleaders and or homecoming queens, right? They were super, super popular. They were very, socially successful. And so I was not. I was really athletic, right? And what ended up happening is my family said, "Well, you're the smart one." And because I looked at the social success that my cousins were having and the sports success that my cousins were having, apparently, my sports success was not like a really good thing. It was kind of like, oh, that's nice. That's very nice. Um, but I was told you're the smart one. And so here's what ends up happening. I go through school, and I think until my sophomore year of college, thinking that being the smart one was a negative thing. And people laugh when they hear that now because I'm such a nerd because I've embraced that part of myself. And at 15, 16, 17, it didn't feel like a good thing to be the smart one. It felt very othering because I was not the what I should be, right? And I think a lot of people can understand that on lots of different levels. And then, once you add on additional social layers to navigate, it gets really, really tense and stressful. So let's talk about personalization now. So we have these labels that people are putting on us, and we have to evaluate what sticks to us, what's accurate, what's not accurate. And then you have personalization, which is blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't your fault. Or, again, the other side, blaming other people for something that actually was your fault. So, this can be kind of summarized in two categories. It's knowing what your baggage is and owning it, and not taking ownership of other people's baggage, right? And so you can kind of, when you put it that way, you can kind of see how the labeling kind of comes together with this. Um, this is one that I meet a lot of really nice, amazing, wonderful people whose lives are completely loaded down with other people's garbage. It's not theirs. And until you go down and you say, hey, is this actually mine? Does this fit? You can be carrying stuff for years, not even yours. So that's something that we need to be mindful of. I want to put this in here specifically. Labeling and personalization, like I said before, can be particularly damaging to the LGBTQ community. Now, I knew that this presentation was going to be mostly for people who are in our community. And so you might be going like, EJ, yeah, we know. We've like lived this life. That's great. Thank you for telling me something that, has never possibly occurred to me before on my everyday lived experience. And I'm not here to insult anybody's intelligence, but what I do want to show is that for our allies, and for our loved ones who might not actually, they may be very, very caring, but they might not be primed to think about these two particular challenges in this particular way. I kind of want to highlight this because it can be so problematic. The social injustices, the direct persecutions. It's really hard to shrug off negative labels that you don't think fit you when there are literal mobs of people out in the world who are willing to scream those same hateful labels at you, right? That is some mental gymnastics that I don't know if anybody should be expected to navigate flawlessly, right? We can talk about damaging religious beliefs, right? Using my own example when I'm talking about, not only was I the smart one, I'm raised in a family that is Catholic, right? And so guess what? When I had my first crush on a girl at 14, wow, that was a problem on so many different levels. And sometimes people ask me, well, how come, why did it take you so long to come out? Because I didn't come out until, my late 20s. Um, I go, let's think about this. One, I'm looking at my family and the world around me, and I'm going like, okay, even just being the smart one's not really a great thing. You think I'm gonna marginalize myself further by going, oh yeah, and by the way, no, I'm not gonna do that. And then just kind of seeing, where I grew up, like people who were brave enough to come out when I was in high school and like maybe possibly hypothetically the late 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah. In what should be considered, okay, New Jersey, it tends to be a little bit blue. It was in a very red portion of New Jersey, very conservative portion of New Jersey. And it really wasn't safe. I hate to say it, it wasn't safe. So, thinking about that, thinking about those damaging religious beliefs, I'm going to be the smart one and I'm going to go to hell. Fantastic. So, thinking about that, being mindful of how some of these things can be pulled forward from our childhood. And even though it's been decades since people have had to deal with those things, it can come back and it can still influence the way that we think about ourselves and the way we interact in the world. Here's one that just happened not too long ago. I applied for a job. I got to a second interview, thought I nailed it, didn't get it. And my partner says to me, I hate to say this, but did you happen to mention anything about me? And I said, I don't think so. But just the fact that we had to have that conversation is a differing and othering experience, right? So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but just in case anybody wants to share this with somebody else, now you have it out there. Okay, so how do we fight back? Let's get to some practical stuff, okay? Because this is actually the fun stuff. So you want to practice awareness, and we want to challenge these thoughts that we're having with questions. Now, remember, challenging thoughts is not the same as judgment, so don't get it twisted on me, okay? And then we're going to use some other resources. So if you are a person who likes simple and quick fixes, here's 3 questions that you can ask yourself when you find that you're saying something that feels negative and might be unhelpful. Is this thought true? Is it necessary? Like, is it necessary to have this thought, right? It might be. And if it happens to be necessary, is it helpful right now? Is this something that I might want to consider later? Yeah, maybe, possibly. But in this moment, is any of this helping me right now? Think about getting out of bed to go to work in the morning, right? Is it true that my work life, if you're having those thoughts, is it true that your work life may objectively suck? Maybe it is. Okay. Is it necessary to tell yourself that in that moment? Well, I don't know. I mean, you're going to get up and go anyway, maybe. So maybe it is, maybe it's not, maybe this is your realization. Is it helpful? Well, if I need help actually getting out of bed to go and face that situation, is focusing on how negative I'm anticipating it going to be helpful? I don't, it might not be. It might be something that you need to examine going forward a little bit. If you are more like me and you like to examine things in closer granularity and 3 questions are just not enough for you, then I have more questions for you. You can play lawyer and say, what's the evidence for or against? You can ask yourself, I love this one, is this based in fact or is it a habit? I'll give you an example. My mother, for years, used to tell everyone when it came up, oh, I'm such a bad speller. Oh, I'm such a bad speller. Oh, I'm such a bad speller. And one day she said it and I looked at her and I said, Mom, is that like actually, are you actually a bad speller? Because my experience of you is not that you're a bad speller. I can't even remember a time when I've seen you misspell something. And she looked at me and she said, I've been saying that to myself for like 40 plus years. And you're right. I'm actually not a bad speller. No, I don't know why I keep saying that. And when she went back later on, she said, you know what? When I was in like second grade, I bombed a spelling test. And I've been telling myself I was a bad speller ever since. Crazy and true, right? So she literally had just become in the habit of telling herself that she was a bad speller. You want to look for, I'm going to lump the last couple together. Are you looking are you looking at all the information? Are you using those all or nothing terms? Are you using the must, shoulds, oughts, can'ts, forevers, nevers, and all of those things that are problematic, right? Listen for those. They're clues that you might be thinking of these things through a particular way. Um, I love this one as well. We take sources of information and sometimes don't evaluate where they come from, right? We've seen this on the internet, but we do it in our own lives too. Is this source of information dependable, right? I thought that being smart was a negative thing, but was that source of information dependable? Was that anybody who was commenting anything about what I aspired to be? Is that who I want to emulate? Was that in my value system? You know, think about those things. Are these reliable sources? Are you only looking at one piece of the story? Another one I love is, are you confusing something that's possible with something that's likely? You know, is it possible that you objectively suck? Well, technically anything's possible. Is it likely that you suck as much as you think you do? I would say no, right? And I will tell that to my clients a lot. You know, I will listen to people who beat themselves up, and say, can we think about this, right? You might have eaten a cupcake when you said that you weren't going to eat cupcakes anymore. Is this reaction of beating yourself up and telling yourself how worthless you are proportional to what happened? You didn't murder somebody, you ate a carbohydrate, right? And kind of thinking about that. What are we doing to ourselves? And when all else fails, I'm going to give you a biohack to restart. So, resetting your brain is as simple as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you can do this in a room full of people, no specialized equipment, and it is backed by science. When you are ruminating on a particular fact, you are using a portion of your brain. And what I'm going to teach you how to do in this moment rewires and reactivates the brain in other areas that it kind of counteracts it. You can't ruminate on a single thought and do all of these other things. So it's kind of like hitting the reset button. If you're old enough to remember the original Nintendo, you'd walk up, you had to hit the reset button a bunch of times. So here's what you do. I want you to look around the room, no matter where you are, and I want you to name 5 objects that you can see around you to yourself. Okay? So I say laptop, phone, bottle of water, paper, hat, and then 4 things that you can touch. And so I might reach down and I might touch my leg, and I'm going to notice the fabric of my pants. And then I'm going to reach down and I'm going to notice the hard plastic of the armchair that I'm sitting in. And then I'm going to contrast that with the cushion of the chair. That's this, you know, kind of textured fabric, your stereotypical office chair, right? And then I'm going to reach for my water bottle and I'm going to feel the coolness of the water and the sweat on the bottle because I forgot my Nalgene, and those 4 things. And then I'm going to do 3 and I'm going to listen. What can I hear right now? I can hear my own voice in my head. I can hear the quiet hum of my laptop. And if I really pause, I can hear the air conditioner. 2 things. 2 things you can smell. So I can smell that before I started this, I sprayed my lavender spray, and I can smell that. And then I can just kind of smell the office air. And then one thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sip of water or I'm going to put a mint in my mouth and I'm going to activate my taste. And by the time you get through that, you have given your brain enough time to stop ruminating on that thing that you were thinking of before. And you can go back and you can ruminate on some more if you want. But this is kind of one of those things that people think is kind of silly when I tell them this. And this is yet again one of the things that my clients come back over and over and over again. They say, hey, that stupid 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing that you taught me, I totally used that in a meeting and I got through it and it works. It works, it works, it works, works. So that's what I've gotten for years. It works, it works. So that's why I'm going to share that with you. So that is the mind hacking. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to any questions that you might have because I can talk about this all day. So.
Thank you so much, EJ. That was a really incredible presentation, and I'm really excited about all the practical information as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so at this time, we will open it to questions. Again, just so nobody's uncomfortable, this is recorded. So if you don't want to ask a question or you came in a little bit late, you can send me a message to the chat box function and ask a question that way or through our online Facebook Live feed. So actually, while we're waiting a little bit, I do have a question that I want to ask. And that is, so you've been talking about all these practical ways, especially those 3 questions you were asking, EJ.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I want to know is, how do you get from the gap of, being in a negative thought pattern or like experiencing something negative and, just being in that habit? How do you get to the point where you remember to ask those questions? Do you have any tips or tricks for that?
That is such a good question. I'm really glad that you asked it. So here's the thing is that um, it's not going to be natural. It's going to feel very forced. So what I really am going to invite people to consider is if you want to be able to do this when your mind is going like 1,000 miles an hour, please don't make that moment the first time that you try any of these techniques out, right? Because you're more than likely not going to remember to do that. So, like during periods of lesser stress, kind of maybe walking through the day to day or whatever, you have this kind of fresh on your brain, and you might just kind of have a little bit more awareness of your thoughts. And when something comes up, try the questions on something, you know, kind of innocent, right? So, like, I walk out of this presentation and I'm going to walk into like the little kitchenette and I'm going to say, feeling hungry. Not something that's giving me a lot of stress, but I go, is it true? Am I actually hungry? Checking in with yourself. And I know that probably sounds kind of like overly simplistic. And that's how you flex your memory muscles to kind of get this on the brain. Other people will write down and keep like a little card in their wallet or put it on a post-it note and put it somewhere where they're more than likely to be stressed. So like if your cubicle is a place of stress for you, then maybe you pin it to your wall just to kind of keep it somewhere. Put it in your phone. But practice it because you're not going to get it right all the time. So any of my perfectionists out there, like you're not going to get it right all the time. But if you can be mindful to try to do some of these things some of the time, then you have a better likelihood of remembering some of these things. The other piece is that if you have a friend, a colleague, a trusted partner, somebody who you want to share this with, then they might be the person that can ask you some of these questions when you feel like you're spinning, because sometimes your brain is too taxed to remember it for yourself. So you reach out and you have somebody else ask you some of these questions for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions right now? Okay, so actually, EJ, something you were saying really leads into another question that is coming from the audience, and that is somebody is asking, how can I support those around me that appear to be demonstrating unhelpful thinking without imposing myself onto them and possibly contributing to more negative thinking.
Oh, I like that. So, um, one of the things that you can do is if you feel like somebody is viewing something in a specifically negative way, right, or unhelpful way, um, I like to say, you know, can I, may I ask you something about that? Or I hear what you're saying, right? Acknowledging where they're at, acknowledging those feelings of where they might be at and the thoughts that they're having, and then saying, like, can I ask you something about them? Or can I help you explore this? Like, this sounds like you're really having some difficulty right now and it sucks and that's stressful, and they might say, yeah, absolutely. Or they might say, no, I just need to kind of be in my zone right now and go forward. So that's something. The other thing is that my favorite phrase is I'm going to invite you to consider. So I never tell people what to do, but say, I'm going to invite you to consider this. You know, again, ask for permission. And if they say yes, then you can say, all right, well, since you've given me permission, can I invite you to consider that um, maybe, whatever the scenario is, maybe it's not your fault and this person was just having a really bad day. Because sometimes if you're the outside person, you can also have contextual knowledge that the person who is like, let's say for personalization, they don't have access to. So let's say we'll use a work scenario. Your boss, snaps at a coworker and they say, God, I'm always getting beat up, at work. Like they just think I'm so stupid. I'm such a failure. I'm probably going to get fired. Um, and you say, hey, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That was so unfair. Can I offer you something to consider though? And they say, yeah. Be like, well, I was just over by the copier and I heard, Susan completely get chewed out by Linda right before she walked over here. So I'm not saying that it was okay for her to do that to you, but it might be fueled from that earlier conversation that they had, and it might not actually be all you, like something like that. And so that's a good way that you can kind of offer that olive branch, but not force your views on somebody else in their pain.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
yeah, so actually, it looks like we don't have any other questions right now. Would you mind, EJ, telling people where they can either find more information or connect with you about some of this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to get in touch with me right now, and especially if you have additional questions, is I'm just going to give you my email address, if that's okay. And so the address that I use is simply EJ. So that's SIMPLY EJ Smith, SMITH at gmail.com. And so you can email me questions, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with me if you want to send me a message through Facebook. I think I have my settings pretty well locked down, so email is probably the best way to do it. But I am absolutely open to questions, and if you're really interested in this subject, um, I think that if you look at anything that's cognitive behavioral therapy, um, it's really all about asking questions. And what we're finding is that people can, you can go to a therapist and have this person kind of walk you through these, but a lot of the times it's really approachable. And if you just know what questions to ask yourself, you can kind of mind hack yourself. And that's why I love sharing these things. So you can Google cognitive behavioral therapy. You can Google, there's something called the Challenging Questions Worksheet for cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's where a lot of these questions come from. And just explore and go easy on the self-judgment. You probably don't suck as much as you think you do. And we'll go forward with that. My supervisor, when I was a baby clinician, actually told me that. She said, I feel comfortable telling people who are worried about it that they probably don't suck as much as they think they do, because if they did, they wouldn't be worried about it. It's just the nature of the beast. Nice people tend to be more burdened with self-criticism and self-judgment than really awful people. Really awful people don't tend to have problems with themselves. So I always try to keep that in mind too.
Thank you so much. It was incredible to have you present, and especially sharing the personal information in ways that people can figure out how to find it in their own lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just so everybody is aware, so this is a monthly series that we do here at OutServe-SLDN. Next month, we will be having a presentation on suicide awareness and prevention in honor of Suicide Awareness Month in September. Details for that will be coming out next week in our mailing list and on our Facebook page. So you keep an eye out for that. If you want to sign up for the mailing list, just go to outserve-sldn.org. It'll be at the bottom of the homepage. You'll see a link to sign up there. So yeah, thank you again, EJ.